I never thought planting a garden could start a war. Not metaphorically, full-blown, clipboard waving. Neighborhood dividing war launched by one woman with way too much time on her hands and a title she used like a weapon. Her name was Cheryl Donnelly, but everyone in our HOA just called her Karen, because she fit the stereotype so perfectly it almost felt scripted. It started innocent. After years of saving, my wife and I finally bought our dream home in the quiet suburb of Brookridge Glen. The house itself wasn't massive, but that yard was everything. Nearly half an acre in the back and a decent stretch in the front, enough space for what I had always wanted, a proper home garden, not just a tomato patch. I'm talking full raised beds, trellises for climbing vegetables, a curved stone path, and a pollinator section for bees and butterflies. It would be beautiful, productive, and peaceful. At least that was the plan. The trouble began exactly 3 days after I started digging. I had just finished laying out the wooden frames for the beds when I heard the unmistakable sound of high heels tapping across pavement, followed by a sharp, condescending voice that cut through the spring breeze like a blade. "Excuse me, sir." I looked up from my crouch and saw her shoulder-length blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, and a stiff beige cardigan, even though it was 80 degrees outside, clipboard in hand. She looked like she'd been waiting her whole life for a moment like, "This, you can't do that," she snapped, pointing to the half-constructed garden beds like they were some kind of nuclear threat. "Do what?" I asked, standing and brushing dirt off my gloves. "That," she repeated, circling her pen in the air. "Dig, construct, install, anything. It hasn't been approved." I blinked. "Approved? It's my yard." She smiled, but there was nothing kind about it. "This is an HOA community, sir, per section 12.3 of the Exterior Modifications Clause. All permanent installations must be submitted to the board and approved before construction. That includes landscaping above 24 inches, decorative paths, and exterior fixtures." I stared at her, genuinely speechless. "You're saying I need permission to plant food in my own yard?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," she said, checking a box on her clipboard with a flourish. "And since you've already started, I'll be issuing a preliminary fine of $250 for unauthorized alteration of your lot. You'll be receiving the formal notice within the week." Then she turned and walked away, like she'd just saved the neighborhood from a terrorist. And I stood there, muddy gloves, heart pounding, not from fear, but from disbelief. I thought she was bluffing. I really did. Surely a community can't regulate something as normal and harmless as a backyard garden. But a week later, the letter came. The fine was real, and it came with a threat. Either remove the garden or face additional daily penalties. My wife, Sarah, was livid. She wanted to confront Cheryl immediately, but I told her no, because I had a better idea. I started reading. I pulled up our HOA's bylaws and scoured every section. And guess what? She was both right and wrong.
Yes.
Technically, any permanent landscaping exceeding 24 inches in height required approval, but vegetable beds weren't considered permanent unless cemented or built into the ground. Mine were raised, movable, and made of wood, temporary by most legal definitions. Even better, I found a clause buried in the appendix that said any gardening intended for sustainable living, food production, or community benefit could qualify for exemption if no written complaint was filed by a neighbor within 15 days of installation. The next morning, I printed that page, highlighted the text, and sent it via certified mail to the HOA, along with a request for a formal exemption. I copied Cheryl. She responded by fining me again. That's when I realized something critical. Cheryl didn't just dislike my garden. She hated that I'd stood up to her. And worse, she was using the HOA like her own personal army. I talked to a few neighbors. Some had gotten fines for things like hanging wind chimes, others for placing potted plants too close to the driveway. One woman got fined for having too many lawn decorations, which turned out to be 3 ceramic frogs. Cheryl wasn't just enforcing rules, she was inventing them, weaponizing them. Most people just paid the fines to avoid the hassle. But not me. I kept building. I added trellises. I laid the stone path, even put in a rain barrel. She came back twice more. Once to scream about the path being a trip hazard, and once to measure my trellises with a tape measure. Both times she added new fines. Each time I appealed, and each time the HOA board surprise sided with her. Then came the real punch. To the gut, a certified letter arrived, stating that I was now over $1,200 in fines, and if I did not remove the unauthorized installation within 10 days, the HOA would file for a lien against my property. A lien over vegetables that night. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the hours I'd poured into this garden, and the food it would provide. The joy on Sarah's face when she picked herbs for dinner, the butterflies I'd seen fluttering over the wildflowers, and then I thought about Cheryl. About how someone so small could hold so much power just because everyone else was too tired or afraid to fight back. Well, not me. The next day, I took everything I had, pictures, letters, bylaw copies, audio recordings of Cheryl's threats, and I called a lawyer. I also did something else. Something that would change everything. I installed a camera, hidden in the front window, aimed at my yard, motion activated, audio enabled, just in case Cheryl decided to make things worse, and oh boy, she did. It was around 6:30 a.m. 3 days. Later, when the footage came in, I wasn't even awake yet. The alert hit my phone and I didn't notice until after coffee. When I opened the app, I stared in disbelief. There she was, Cheryl. In my yard. Not on the sidewalk. Not at the edge. Inside the raised beds. Kicking at the base of the trellis like a child throwing a tantrum, pulling at the vines, tipping over the compost bin. She vandalized my garden. I hid every second. On camera, I filed a police report that afternoon. The officer who came by was surprisingly kind. Said he'd had other calls about Cheryl over the years, noise complaints, threatening notes, even one where she allegedly put nails in someone's driveway. Classic HOA queen, he said, shaking his head. But now, I had something none of. The others did. Proof. We downloaded the footage, attached it to the report. And just like that, things shifted. Because it turns out, Cheryl didn't just violate my property. She violated HOA regulations herself. By entering my yard, damaging property, and doing so without permission or legal cause. She had committed trespass and vandalism, both of which were enough for the board to be held accountable if they didn't. I sent copies of everything to the HOA board, not to Cheryl. This time, I bypassed her completely. I wrote a clean, professional letter outlining the timeline of harassment, the video footage, and the legal consequences of continuing to find me under false pretenses. And then, I waited. What happened next? Even I didn't see coming. I didn't hear from the HOA for 4 days after I submitted the footage and letter. 4 days of complete silence. No calls, no emails, no new fines. It was eerie, like the eye of a storm. I half expected Cheryl to come charging down the street, with another clipboard and her ridiculous beige cardigan. But for the first time since we moved in, there was nothing but quiet. Then, on the 5th day, I got an email. Not from Cheryl, but from the HOA board president, a man named Alan Brewster. I had only seen him once at the neighborhood meeting when we first moved in. Tall, balding, wore Hawaiian shirts like they were a personality. His message was short but significant. Mr. Davis, we have received your complaint, including the video footage and documentation. The board will be conducting an emergency review session this week. We'll notify you of our findings. That was it. No denial. No, we're standing by our policy. Just acknowledgement. I showed the message to Sarah, and for the first time in weeks, she smiled. Do you think they're finally going to do something? She asked. I think I said, they're realizing that Cheryl might be more of a liability than an asset. 2 days later, I saw something that all but confirmed it. A notice on the HOA bulletin board near the park, usually filled with bake sale flyers and pool cleaning schedules, had a new posting in bold. Special HOA session board member conduct review location, community center time, Thursday. At 6 p.m., residents welcome to attend. It didn't mention Cheryl by name, but I knew. I showed up that Thursday, not really expecting much. Maybe a slap on the wrist, maybe an apology hidden under legal phrasing. But what happened? Oh, it was so much better. The community center was packed. Any HOA event, and they weren't just curious, They were angry. I overheard murmurs everywhere. She'll find us for a mailbox color who does that. She once said my wind chimes were audibly aggressive. She said I couldn't have pumpkins out in October because it wasn't fall-themed enough. Then Cheryl walked in. She looked shaken. Not her usual stiff-armed strut. Her hair wasn't perfectly styled. Her lipstick was smudged. And for once, she wasn't carrying her clipboard like a scepter. She looked like someone who knew they were about to lose control. The board sat at the front of the room. Alan cleared his throat and began. We've convened today due to a series of complaints and a significant piece of video evidence submitted by Mr. Davis, a homeowner here in Brookridge Glen. This evidence contains video footage of a board member is Cheryl Donnelly trespassing on private property. Her as an officer of the HOA, gasps, whispers. Cheryl tried to speak, but Alan held up a hand. We will allow her to speak in a moment. First, the footage. And there, on a projector screen pulled down in front of everyone, was Cheryl caught, red-handed. My garden, kicking the trellis, yanking at the vines, cursing under her breath as she pulled up flowers and knocked over. My compost bin like a toddler mid-dash meltdown. The room went silent. Then the murmurs began again. Louder this time, a few gasps. And another person said she did that to me too. Alan turned to Cheryl. Would you like to respond? She stood. Her hands were trembling. That video doesn't show what happened before. He provoked me. His garden was in violation. He was threatening the look of our community. I was just doing what needed to be done. Someone from the back shouted, by kicking vegetables. You need help? Alan raised his hand again for silence. Ms. Donnelly, he said, we have reviewed the bylaws and confirmed that Mr. Davis's installation qualifies under the sustainability exemption.
Ow.
Furthermore, we've received reports from at least 9 other residents who allege misconduct, targeted enforcement, and misuse of fines. He paused. As of tonight, you are being removed from your position as HOA enforcement chair. A vote of the board has determined that your actions are not in keeping with our code of conduct. Additionally, the board will be reviewing all fines you've issued over the last 12 months for legitimacy. Cheryl sat back down, red-faced and stunned. The clipboard never made an appearance. The meeting ended with a standing ovation, not for the board, but for me. Or maybe for all of us who had been silently pushed around until someone finally pushed back. I walked out of that meeting feeling like I'd reclaimed something I didn't even know I'd lost. The right to peace in my own home, but I wasn't done yet. The next week, I withdrew $1,200 from my bank account, the exact amount Cheryl had tried to fine me. I used it to expand the garden. New raised beds, a small greenhouse, a wooden arch over the entrance with vines already reaching up toward the sky. I painted a sign, too, not petty, just poetic. It read, The Garden of Second Chances. Sarah and I invited the neighborhood kids to plant flowers. The elderly couple down the street brought tomato starts. The single mom next door brought over herbs. A literal community garden, legal, beautiful, and stronger than any clipboard could ever hope to control. About 2 months later, Cheryl moved out. No big announcement. No farewell party. Just a for sale sign and a moving truck early one Saturday morning. I stood at the edge of the garden, sipping coffee, watching her load the last of her boxes. She glanced over once. I nodded. She looked away that afternoon. The HOA board came by with a new letter. This one wasn't a fine. It was an apology and a thank you. Apparently, Cheryl had never been elected officially. She was appointed after the last guy moved away, and no one bothered to challenge her. She filled in the blanks with her own rules, used her role like a crown, and most people just assumed she had the power she claimed, but not anymore. From that day on, Brookridge Glen was different, calmer, happier. People started decorating again. Gardens started popping up. The ceramic frogs returned, and me spent my mornings pulling weeds, harvesting carrots, and helping kids pick cherry tomatoes. All because one Karen messed with the wrong gardener. And in the end, the only thing that got buried was her power.